Okay, so to begin this project, I'm going to begin with the debarking of the wood. So as I've mentioned, I do have the stick in an angle, and I have the knife positioned downward and away from my body. So as you can see, I've moved my legs kind of out of the picture. That way there is no going underneath. I can't slip off, and if I do slip off, it will hit my chair. So I'll begin with the debarking as of right now. So it's not always clean. It's not always super smooth. Doesn't always look pretty at the very beginning, but like I mentioned, it is a slow and steady process. There is no rush. It's not a quick task, and it can get a little bit messy. I have placed a small towel on the ground so I can easier clean up my mess. Definitely have a vacuum handy if you're doing it inside. This activity is definitely preferred outside, but just for the sake of ease, I'm going to do it inside. If you place a stick in your shoulder up here, if you do have it long enough, that is a little bit more stability. You have a little bit more strength you can put into whittling it. And as you can see, I have my fingers right here. So with the blade, my index finger is out of the way of it. The rest of my hand is on the guard down here, and my thumb is on top. This is not a sharp part of the blade. So that gives me a little bit more strength and security when I'm pushing down on the knife to kind of guide it. If you do whittle, or when you whittle and you do hit a knot, don't worry about the knot. Just kind of whittle it into it as far as you can get it, and try and try and like clean up the edges around it. But then you can sand over that, and then we can work on that when we get there. I'll do a little display of what you do with the knot. I'll use the saw end of this knife, so you're going to want to have some kind of utensil for that you can just chop off the knot with. So depending on the size of your stick, whittling can take longer, shorter times than this right here. This will be a little bit shorter because I have taken off the other bark around it to kind of just give a simplified version of the task. But if I were to do the whole entire stick, it might take me about 15 or 20 minutes. So it's kind of just a peaceful activity. It's good if you're out camping or just trying to relax late at night when you're just kind of easing down, those kind of things. So I am getting down toward the end of the stick where you can no longer see it in the video, so I'm going to move the video right down here, because I'm no longer the important part in the video. Like I said earlier, this is a peaceful task for me because I used to do it with my grandpa when I was younger. We used to go camping all the time, and this is kind of his thing. He gave me a few knives that we used when we were whittling. We would use hatchets and just kind of cut off our own sticks to create the designs that we wanted. We did not have an etcher when I was younger. The etcher is somewhat new to me, but as long as you're nice and slow with it, things will go just how you plan. It is a patience thing with the etcher because it doesn't work just like a pencil. You kind of have to let it go into the wood and burn its way through, so it does take a second. So for the bark part, I pretty much have the bark taken off. It was not a very long task. And now what I'm doing right now is just kind of cleaning up the edges a bit, making sure that I get the little residue off, things like that. And I'll move the video back up to where it started. So I have a couple knots, not very big ones, just small ones that I can work around. But as you can tell, when I come through and I hit a knot, it catches. And so that's where the rough part of your wood ends up. So that's where the sandpaper comes in handy. Avoid little splinters, nothing major. And also when it comes to just using a walking stick, you want it to be smooth, something that's comfortable in your hand, especially when you're putting a lot of body weight on it. So I'll just finish up this part. And I'll get any other bark that's left on the stick. Just clean it up a bit before I do sand. That way I can get it all done. I have not sanded the entire stick, so I will be doing that. Sanding is not a long process. It's pretty simple. It's just a repetitive motion with your hand, and the sandpaper does all the work. So right now what I'm doing is cleaning up the rest of the bark. I am trying to do any quick shavings over the knots, just to kind of smooth them out before I do have to cut them. But like I mentioned, the blade is not coming upward. It's not coming up in my hand. There's no risk there. It's moving down and away from my body. The stick, it's not on the underside of the stick, so it can't slip away and cut my leg. It is always on the outside, away from my body. So leverage is important when you're whittling or using any kind of knife. You want to be in an ergonomic position. That way you are putting the pressure on it and it is not putting the pressure on you. You don't want to find yourself in a questionable position where you're wondering if you should be doing this, because if you do have to wonder, is this right? Am I doing it right? You probably aren't. So you want to be in control of the task. You don't want the stick to be slipping. As you can see, it just slipped out from underneath me a little bit. So I'm going to put my foot around that and kind of guide it. A little bit more bark up here, so I'm going to switch this around, make sure it's going down toward the ground. Luckily for me, it is pretty easy to get access to sticks because I do live right by the woods. I live in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. A little bit about me. I moved up here about 12 years ago, so I've been up here for a while. This is nothing new to me, but whittling is nice. I haven't done it in a little while, but it's always relaxing. I do like being crafty. More of the rougher edges of craft. I'm not too skilled with the crocheting, things like that. Not really my forte. Excuse me. So, put the knife down. So I think I have the bark off. Good. A little bit down there. So I do take back what I said earlier about not using the saw edge of this, because I'm going to use it and I'm going to take care of some of these knots. That way if you come across a knot on your stick, or in the future you come across a knot, you can just get rid of it. It's no hard task. So this is the saw end of my knife, and I have a couple knots, one right here, a little bit around the stick. Nothing major, nothing big at all. If you do find yourself with a stick that has a lot of knots, just look for a different one. They are a little bit more difficult to get rid of, and it does create a rougher edge for your stick, so if you don't have any sandpaper, it might be a little bit tougher. So as you can see, I'm just kind of sawing away at it. And you might not get the whole knot. These knives aren't meant to be cutting into huge knots. They're meant for sawing off little edges of branches to kind of get the stick that you want. So again, I'm sawing away from my body. Okay, so that's super rough. Really rough. You will get that. Your saw end is not going to make it smooth for you. It's going to create a little bit more of a task. But that's okay, because that's what we have sandpaper for. There we go. Okay. So that's all I'll do for the knots right there. So I do have some tough edges. I'll go over those real quick, get any extra little bits and pieces off that's around those. Alright. So that'll be it for my whittling. I might come back to it, we'll see.